You're listening to 50 Pirates in 50 Days on the Sports Objective Podcast. A new era of East Carolina football is here and will begin on August 31st when Mike Houston leads the Pirates into action at NC State. Between now and then, join us for a daily trip down memory lane as we experience Pirate football through the words of the men who made those memorable moments happen. Here's your host, Bubba Rosenbaum.
Well, one of the best parts of the summertime is our next segment. Of course, we've been doing it since July the 12th. It's 50 days, 50 Pirates, and Bubba, we got a special one now.
Yeah, very excited to catch up with a lineman from the late 80s and early 90s, Mike McCalop. Mike, welcome into the show.
Thank you, Bubba. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, Mike, we wanted to have you on. Certainly one of the reasons why we started our podcast was to catch up with all Pirate players. Some, places want to just have certain people or whatever, or different eras. So we actually have tried to reach out to as many players as we can, and I don't know about you, we're getting very excited about football season, and every hour I'm like, don't want to wish the summer away, but we certainly are looking forward to that first game against NC State and Raleigh.
Of course, Dave. It's an exciting time. You got a new coach, so everyone feels like there's new possibilities. And so, and of course, your first game against your rival, so it couldn't be any better.
And you know all about that rivalry, right, with NC State and, of course, the 87 with the riot in Raleigh and all that mess, and then having the Peach Bowl, so you know all about that.
Absolutely. I know how heated it can be, yes.
Now, Mike, your time at ECU, like Dave was just saying, began in 87. So talk us through your recruitment. Obviously, you were brought in by Coach Baker and his staff, and then played your last 3 years for Coach Lewis. So talk about that.
Like you say, the whole recruitment process, actually, the recruitment, there was a person on Art Baker's staff. His name was Don, I believe it was Nelson, but he was the assistant head coach, and his wife actually was a relative of my head coach in high school, and that's how I got the connection with East Carolina, because I went to a really small school. So, and especially back then, you didn't have social media, so it was really hard for me to get any press or get noticed. At the school I went to, my graduating class was less than 100 people. So,
and just to clarify for our listeners, you went to James Kenan down in Warsaw, correct?
Correct. James Kenan. They've won a couple state championships over the last few years. So, it's always been a football school. So. You've had a lot of good players come out of there, and so that's how I ended up at East Carolina. It was just, who you know and circumstances. And
Mike, I can tell you, I can relate with you because my class was just a little bit bigger. I went to Williamston High School, north of Greenville, and we only had 125, and I graduated in 91. That's when I came to East Carolina the next year, but that's how many students we had back then. So I can certainly relate to you being at it was barely a 2A, and they dropped down after I left to a 1A because we were just barely on that border of 1A and 2A.
And James Kenan has done the same thing. They were a 2A, and then they dropped down to 1A for the exact same reason, because their enrollment has dropped. So with at a 1A school, it's really hard for a kid to get any attention.
So Mike, coming into ECU, I know you were on the defensive side of the ball before transitioning to the offensive line. So talk a little bit about that, your arrival onto the scene, and how things went.
Of course, coming into East Carolina that particular year, you have to remember, I came in with a class that was pretty stout. You had Robert Jones, Jeff Blake, Luke Fisher. You had some guys who were really prominent, and so it wasn't, I guess now it's common for freshmen to come in, start, and play. But back then, it was kind of one of those things where it didn't happen very often. But the class that I came in with, all of us expected to play. All of us expected to be starters. And so that was just kind of the mindset that I went into with, if they all believe they can start, so can I. So that's how I went into it. I did start on defense. Like I said, my very first game was against Florida State. I remember that game so vividly. First play, Deion Sanders catches one at the 5-yard line and runs 95 yards untouched. And we lose the game by 7 points.
Oh, man.
There were big expectations simply because, at that point with Coach Baker, you'd had several losing years. And so he believed that my class that he recruited was going to change things, and ultimately it did, but he wasn't there to be able to see it, unfortunately. He was a very good man, very good person. I loved him dearly. Couldn't have asked for a better person. It's just, I think he was kind of, I don't want to say in a negative way, he was just kind of behind in his thinking as far as what football had turned into.
There in the 80s, of course, we had been without a conference for several years, and we were a major Division 1A independent, as it was identified at the time, playing some very challenging schedules that included the likes of Miami, Penn State, LSU, etc. So talk a little bit about that and what that was like.
That was, Bubba, to be perfectly honest, that was kind of like a murderer's row. I remember 87 really well because, like I said, I started out on defense, ended up on offense because I think it was in 3 weeks, we lost 11 starters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how bad it was. Because we played West Virginia, Pitt, and Miami back to back to back.
Wow.
Back then, Pitt was a power. West Virginia was still good, and Miami, of course, was Miami. I mean, they were one of the preeminent programs in the country. And so to play them, like I said, the very first game was against Florida State. We basically would play anybody, anywhere, anytime. And
right.
Unfortunately, because without the conference affiliations, because of not having that kind of recruiting ability, started talking about our depth. It wasn't anywhere near what the teams we were playing with. And so when you put a guy out there, who on another school might be second or third string, and he's playing out there against guys who ultimately could be pros, a lot of them didn't last very long. And so, like I said, we lost half of starters, and there was no coming back from that. When you lose 11, 22 starters in 3 weeks, I mean, it's very unlikely you're going to do well.
And let's go. I'm sorry, but
go ahead, Dave. No problem.
Mike, I was just going to say the fact that I remember that's when I became a Pirate fan, moving to Eastern North Carolina to Williamston. I had a chance to go probably about the year before you got there. And '86 was my first Pirate game of that fall in 8th grade, FC 8 day with Art Baker. And I'll never forget during that, you were talking about that time, the slogan, "We're going after the best." And maybe that's why I have the mindset I do. That's how I got introduced to Pirate football, to be, like you said, anytime, anywhere, any place. But scheduling, I know it was way over the top because we didn't have the conference affiliation until '97. But do you think, as far as scheduling goes, I know you said Murder's Row, but do you think we should play the big-time programs like we did in the past?
Absolutely. I know for me, that was part of the reason why I came to Eastern Carolina because they weren't affiliated with the conference, and I played some of the best competition in the country. I wanted to play against the best. I mean, really, I got recruited by a lot of smaller schools, but as far as big schools, the only schools, Division I schools that recruited me were East Carolina and State. That's it. And
wow.
honestly, up until probably the last part of my senior year, I was going to State. And then they really got on a kick that, hey, they were going to make me into this interior offensive lineman, and I wanted to play defense. And, coming to East Carolina, that's how I started out. So that's how I ended up at East Carolina, because they told me I was going to play defense and I was going to play against some of the best competition in the country. And if you're talking to a kid who really, because he wants to have recognition and he wants to be in the spotlight, you want kids like that. So you want to play the best. If you want the best kids, you got to play the best. I mean, because you want to be in that spotlight. I mean, back then playing at Florida State, I mean, I'll never forget that. It was a packed house. They were all chatting, and nothing better than being in a stadium that large and making them all go silent. There's not a better feeling in the world. And, at one point they were really scared that they were going to lose that game. And that's what you play for. You play for big moments. You want kids that want that. So how can you expect those kind of players if you're not playing that kind of schedule?
That's very true, and certainly one of the things we're trying to get is an indoor practice facility, but you were talking about back then with no social media. I guess that's why you only had 2 offers, because we obviously know with your career you were very talented.
I mean, it's like you say, there's no social media. I was honorable mention All-State, played a bunch of All-Star games, and I only got 2 Division I offers. I mean, the other offers I got were, they were for Division I schools, but I mean, they weren't anyone of any consequence. So, I mean, you're right. But in today's social media, where you can have a presence without having to be, at a big school, it does play into it. So if you add that scheduling element, especially, and this is not a knock to AAC, but when you look at the AAC top to bottom, nobody's going to be very fearful of that conference. So it's very top heavy, and so you gotta add something to it. I mean, even if it's to the detriment of your overall record, I think for recruiting purposes and for the development of the program, you got to do that.
So, Mike, following the 1988 season, obviously there was a coaching change. You had Bill Lewis, who was a very well-respected defensive coordinator at the University of Georgia, coming in. The Pirates program, we hadn't had a winning season since '83, so he was really having to establish a culture. So talk about that process.
I guess the biggest thing is if you wanted to look at 2 different coaches, Art Baker was more kind of a really players coach that really wanted players to like him and, wanted the players to believe in his system, which was good in that sense. But at the same time, when Coach Lewis came, he wanted a complete culture change. So he was much stricter, a lot more discipline as far as players, a lot more accountability as far as the players, a lot more competition as far as the players. And honestly, anytime you're talking about having a high-level program, you gotta have competition and you gotta have accountability. You gotta have those 2 things. So that was probably the biggest thing that he brought He brought accountability. He brought competition. You had to keep your job. And, yeah, so that was the biggest culture change as far as that was concerned.
And I want to bring that's a good point you make about culture change. Segue to the now for a minute. What do you think about, for the players, coaching change between Art Baker and Bill Lewis? I remember that era very well, and certainly right before when I was at school there. Talk about right now, what do you think the guys are going through right now, going from Coach Montgomery to Coach Houston, knowing that you've been through a coaching change as well at your time at East Carolina?
The biggest thing is getting used to, it's kind of like, unfortunately, it's kind of like changing girlfriends. You got to get used to all these different things, and you kind of, at first, you're kind of walking on eggshells because you're not really sure until you kind of have a feel for it. And then once that, you become more comfortable with it, it becomes a lot more natural. It's not forced. And so that's going to be the biggest part as far as the guys that are coming in. Plus, the new regime has the task of saying, okay, we understand that this is the way things have been done in the past, but now this is what we're doing. And we need you to believe in this, and more importantly, we need you to jump on board with this 100%. And so as far as changing regimes, that's the biggest thing, is buying into the culture and believing that, you know, the new system is going to be something that's going to be for the better, and then getting everybody pointed in that same direction. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And honestly, I'm like probably every other Pirate fan. When I heard about the hire, I thought it was a great hire. He's done well everywhere he's gone. I have actually talked to some of his former players just through happenstance and traveling the games. They all think highly of him, which says a great deal about him. So I honestly, I think he'll do very well very quickly. I have expectations that the Pirates will do well even this season.
Mike, during those 89 and 90 seasons, a lot of close calls. You were just a moment ago talking about the culture shift and how Coach Lewis was really establishing that. Won 5 ball games in each of those seasons, had close calls against the likes of Syracuse, Pitt, Georgia, and several others. But moving into that 91 season, you could see that something was special, something that was special on the way, but not necessarily 11-1. But kind of going into that season, could you as a team sense that as well?
Again, Bubba, I mean, coming into when that freshman class came in, we had high expectations. And really up until that point, we really hadn't met them. So I remember coming in, and I came in early that summer of 87, and I roomed with Robert Jones. And, Robert told me even back then he was going to be an All-American. And I remember the first time I met Jeff Blake, he said he was going to win the Heisman. I mean, so, of course, we had expectations that had been unfulfilled. So going into that season, it was kind of like, you keep saying that you're going to do well, you keep saying you're going to do well, but you haven't done it. So, Coach Lewis decided to adopt the I Believe anthem, and, it was time to make everybody else believe it. So, I mean, because I got to be honest, that group, we always believed that we were better than our record showed. We really did. We had all the confidence in the world. Whether or not that was valid or not, I can't say, but we always believed we were better than our record. And so when it came time, because we had so many close calls, we had so many games where we literally a ball bounces a different way, and, people are talking about us shocking, a top 20 team. And it was time to actually put that into fruition. And so that's the expectation we had going into that season.
One of the things I wanted to follow up on from that 91 season, specifically with you being an offensive lineman, is I recall the Memphis game, Memphis State as they were known as at that time. Those guys were coming off an upset of USC out of the Coliseum. And, of course, we were coming off the heartbreaking loss up at Illinois where we had rallied from 28 points down and lost 38-31. But in that game against Memphis State, it was a dogfight. And there toward the end, we were trying to put the game away. And I just remember us running the same play over and again with Cedric Van Buren and going left and right. I'm trying to remember if it was
Bubba,
exactly what the play was.
Let me go ahead and correct you. It was the same play, and it was 17 times, and it was all to the right. I know because I was the left guard that pulled all 17 times. It was the same play, stacked to the right. They even slid everyone to the right, and we still ran it. And I can remember looking at Coach Shankwilder, and after probably about the 10th time, I tapped my head to let him know that I was gassed and he needed to run something else. And he just looked at me just very calmly and without any expression. And he just put his fist rolling one over the other, like I'm getting ready to run this until we score. And he did. He ran it. We ran that play until we scored. And
as an offensive lineman, anybody that's played football, regardless of which side of the ball they're on, can attest to just how demoralizing that is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're sitting. The Memphis team is sitting there literally saying, "Okay, the play's going to the right. The play's going to the right. They're stacking to the right, and you still keep running it to the right." I mean, we literally didn't change a thing. The only thing that changed during that time is running backs. Other than that, we ran the same play 17 times.
I'll tell you what, that's my kind of football right there. Is that sometimes, and that was one thing I was thinking when you were talking about that, Mike, is a very fact. Sometimes coaches try to get too cute in today's world that we live in and try to have too many wrinkles. And sometimes if you keep things simplified and if you got something working, why in the world would you change it?
Correct. And pretty much that's it goes back to what you're saying. Sometimes coaches outcoach themselves. Football is simply a game of matchups. And if you got an advantage at a particular personnel position, whether it be your offensive line or your skill position or quarterback, whatever your advantage is, you need to utilize that advantage as much as possible. And you don't need to hide it. You need to put it out there. Hey, this is who we are. And I mean, because I believe this wholeheartedly. Coaches have gotten too tied up into systems versus personnel. You have to tailor your system to your personnel. If you got people who are just for a round and pound sort of game, then that's what you need to do, and vice versa. If you have a bunch of kids that need to air it out pretty much every play, that's what you need to do. But you need to be able to change with times. You need to be able to adapt. And I think that's the problem a lot of coaches have, is that they're not able to adapt to whatever personnel they're able to put on the field.
Mike, during those years, there were obviously so many memorable moments, especially in that 1991 season. But can you give us a favorite individual moment or two, or also maybe one or two from a team perspective?
Individual moment. Biggest individual moment for me, we're playing Pitt. We just scored it towards the end of the game, and we decided to go for 2 for the win. The players called for me to pull to the right, and I come up, Ian crashes down, kick out the linebacker, and Jeff just slides in right behind me and scores. And I roll over and I'm done. But I know we won the game. The only way I knew that he scored is because I heard the crowd. The crowd went 8-6. I knew he had scored. So I mean, I was locked up with the guy, and he really. I've watched that play since, and he had a freeway he could have run through. I'm not sure why he made it so dramatic, but yeah, he scored. That was the bottom line.
He's a quarterback,
that
right?
That was a big moment for me. I remember doing an interview after that, and the guy asked me, how did I feel about that play? I said, I feel like every offensive lineman does. He said, did he score? And that's all that matters. I didn't care about getting recognized for that block because, it's a team sport. And the big thing was, hey, that was a big win for us. That really propelled us. That puts us in a national spotlight more than anything. And now, you really had to respect the actual name for it. People were actually going to hear, all right, you beat Pitt, and Pitt was a top 20 team. As far as team, obviously, it's got to be the Peach Bowl because you're down fourth quarter. It's 7 minutes. You're down 17 points. I will never forget all the NC State fans packing up and leaving. It was I think it was 6 minutes and 30 seconds, and they literally all started leaving. I mean, and that, to me, that was, we all looked at each other like that was the most disrespectful thing they could have ever done. I mean, because I remember how fast we scored. We averaged scoring in 1 minute and 30 seconds. And there's 6 minutes on the clock, and you're telling me we're not down 3 scores? Yeah, you can't walk out on this. So that was the biggest moment from a team's perspective. Obviously, winning that game and, finishing in the top 10. I was completely done after that game. But I remember, everybody being up on the stage, and I actually went into the stands and sat down next to this lady, and she kept asking me, aren't you going to go out there and celebrate? And I was like, nope, they're going to celebrate for me right now. Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny you say that because I remember some players. I can't remember if it was Nick Wilson maybe and some others helping. It may have been their family or just other Pirate fans over the wall down onto the field.
Yes, absolutely, that was Nick. Yep. Nick and Terry Tillman. Yep. They were helping their families jump up because everybody rushed the field. I did the exact opposite. I went into the stands and I just had a seat because I was beat.
Well, and Mike, can you talk about after college, what you were up to and then what you're doing now?
After college, I tried out for a bunch of different professional teams. Never stuck because I kept getting hurt. And, that's just part of it. I never was, after I got my first knee injury, I really never stayed healthy very long. So I bounced around for a while doing different things, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I came back to East Carolina, got my degree. Then I went and I worked as a therapist in Atlanta for about 10 years, realized that dealing with crazy people all the time was making me crazy. And so I decided that was not a career path. In 2003, I came back to North Carolina. Unfortunately, My sister passed away from ovarian cancer, so
Oh,
close to my mom because my dad passed away in '97. So my sister was the only family member that was really there to make sure she was okay. So I moved back and I started working for Nationwide Insurance, and I did that for the better part of 15 years. Insurance, did a lot of good things, went a lot of places, did well for myself with that, but again, not something I really enjoy doing. Today I work for an engineering firm in Columbus that they are fairly global. They have 27 offices in 5 states here in the Midwest, and they have 5 offices in India. So I do their corporate maintenance, taking care of things as far as the different facilities. Some, like any other job, some days I love it, some days not so much. It just depends on the day. But overall, it does well, and, you know, I get to do a lot of things I wouldn't get to do otherwise.
Mike, we really appreciate your time this morning. I really enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane for sure and hearing about your days in the purple and gold and what ECU means to you. And we look forward to having you back on the show down the road.
All right. Thank you very much.
We enjoyed it.
You guys have a good day, and I appreciate you having me.
That concludes this edition of 50 Pirates in 50 Days on the Sports Objective. Remember, join us daily between now and game day as we'll talk Pirate football with players from various eras. All these interviews are available exclusively on SoundCloud and our YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe and follow so you're alerted when we post new content. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, go Pirates!